BYU Cougars handle their business and celebrate their home opener in style as they completely dominate an overmatched Holy Cross team. This is Postcast with an update on a significant injury.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast, and this is a postcast. It's much delayed. Had some significant technical difficulties with my equipment when I got home to fire it up, and essentially had to kind of rewire everything, rejigger it all. So we are back, and BYU handled their business, and it was a bit of a laugher as BYU runs away from the Holy Cross Crusaders 98-53. They're now 2-0 on the season in their non-conference slate. And I got to say, the biggest thing I took away from this game tonight was not on the court. It's that BYU will be without senior guard Nate Pickens, a transfer into this basketball program, and a guy that BYU, as Kevin Young said, brought in specifically because he complimented the guys they already had on the roster. Remember, Pickens was a standout at UC Riverside in the Big West Conference. He was a guy who shot the three at a pretty high level a season ago and was expecting to come in and kind of be one of those upperclassmen role players that was able to complement guys like an AJ DeBonce, Richie Saunders, Robert Wright III. And unfortunately, due to an undisclosed injury, he underwent season-ending surgery earlier this week and will miss the entire season. So that's a disappointment for the BYU basketball program to lose a guy like that before you even see him on the court. Now, as some others noted out there, I think guys like Robbie McCombs and others, a guy like Nate Pickens does have a redshirt year available. He could return in 2026-27, the next season for BYU basketball, and we'll see if he ultimately decides to do just that. The other flip side of it is he could find himself essentially on a brand new looking roster next season because Kevin Young's been very clear that his whole plan with his roster building at BYU is going to be essentially a season to season deal. They will target certain players in the portal because they fit what the archetype of what they want their program to be on a year-to-year basis. And also, I do think it's actually the right way to go about things, if we're being honest about how Kevin Young's trying to make this BYU basketball team into a national contender, is to look at the strengths of the players you have on your roster and configure the lineup to accentuate those strengths. And one of those strengths, I think, for this BYU basketball team, as Kevin Young also pointed out post-game tonight, is that if teams like a Villanova, and in this case, Holy Cross tonight, are so intent on stopping BYU from hoisting up mass amounts of threes, guess what? The Cougars will go to the rim, and they will obviously dominate on the interior, and that's exactly what BYU did, to the tune of 62 of their 98 points were scored in the paint. That's an incredible number, but it shows that BYU has the ability to dominate games in a myriad of ways. And I think we just lost. There we go. Got the mic back. So apparently all is not well with regards to my equipment. But the bigger point is BYU continues to dominate in these games and show what they're capable of, despite not maybe hoisting up the amount of threes that you and I probably like out there in terms of what we've seen from previous iterations of this BYU basketball team. And I also thought Dawson Baker said post-game that, yeah, if they want to guard us on the three-point line, we'll take what they'll give us, and that means going inside and scoring points on the interior. So overall, a very thorough win for BYU. There was not much to write home about with regards to anything that Holy Cross did to stop BYU to any significant level. But I also look at the way the BYU played this game is I wanted to see them play with more with the pass. And that's exactly what they did. And they had a lot of dunks at the rim, a lot of lobs, and quite frankly, just a lot of ball movement. And that's kind of one of the hallmarks of what I want to see from this BYU team is their ability to play with the pass versus playing a bunch of ISO ball. We all know that Robert Wright III and AJ DeBonce are very capable of single-handedly dominating possessions if they need to. And they will have moments that are going to need to dominate those possessions. The thing I want to see is in games like this, like they did tonight, share the ball. And obviously everybody kind of gets in on the action. That was good to see. Dominic Diomande I thought had a good showing for BYU in this game. And I think that's the fun part about this, is that games like this allow the deep bench players for BYU to show off what they're capable of and kind of show the coaching staff, hey, this is what you're missing out on by not having me in the rotation. So I'm very curious to see where things go from here for BYU. But they'll have another tune-up game, I probably will call it that, against Delaware coming up on Tuesday night at the Marriott Center. And then they got another big non-conference game a week out, and that's the UConn Huskies at TD Garden out there in Boston. That'll be a 7 p.m. Eastern time tip, 5 o'clock Mountain time. Obviously, you'll be able to have the doubleheader with BYU football kicking off their game at 8:15 Mountain time. So nice little setup where 5 o'clock on the Mountain time for basketball, then 8:15 for football. It's a nice back-to-back for BYU on a Saturday night if you're looking for something to tune into a week out. So really do think that BYU showed a lot of what they're capable of, showed improvement. I thought the defense showed better against a completely overmatched Holy Cross team. And like, there's always going to be things to work on, because I'm sure that Kevin Young will identify stuff when it comes to reviewing that tape. But the nice part is it was a relatively easy home win. And outside of the disappointing news about Nate Pickens being lost for the season due to season-ending surgery, pretty good night, all things considered, for the Cougars on the hardwoods. Now, one other thing I want to note on the basketball front we'll get to, and I also do want to talk about also the women's sports scene for BYU. Some important developments, one in particular tonight that we will get to. And I do think that we are seeing kind of the depth and breadth of what BYU basketball is capable of with what they're doing right now. But it also extends over into other BYU sports, and we'll get to that momentarily as you roll on this postcast edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. They're offering up an incredible offer, and the NBA is back, obviously. And if you want to get in on the action with our friends at FanDuel, you can do just that, because they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The new offer they're giving out to every customer is new customers get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet hits. Simple as that. And the best part is you can do live betting throughout the game. If you feel like you got the guy who's got the hot hand in a game, your team's on the comeback, you can take advantage of all of that with our friends over at FanDuel. And more importantly, once again, get $300 extra bucks in your account if that first $5 bet hits. And you also combine them for a same game parlay if you want to increase your odds of winning as well. So if you want to get started today, go to FanDuel.com. Once again, your first $5 bet can net you $300, and take advantage of that today with our friends over at FanDuel on FanDuel.com. Of course, they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us on this postcast edition of the show. Good question here, actually, put in. Let's get to this real quick. I saw Amir Abdullah was at the game. With Nate being gone for the year, any chance he could join the team during the year if he commits? What about KJ Perry? Could he also fill Nate's spot this year? It's a good question by Adam. So as I understand it, Adam, KJ Perry, who was already committed to BYU, he's actually enrolling at mid-year, so the winter semester. That's the slot that Amir Abdullah Ahmed, could feel had KJ Perry not already taking it. As things stand right now, Ahmed's going to have to enroll when the season ends. So essentially coming up in the spring and then go through BYU during the summer. That's kind of the rub with a guy like Ahmed, as Houston, who is his other finalist. It's Houston and BYU. So Cougars versus Cougars. And Houston can take him right away at the mid-year break, whereas KJ Perry's already kind of taken that slot. Now, could they insert a guy like KJ Perry into the lineup if he's up to speed to fill that role for Nate Pickens? TBD. It's worth maybe considering, but I also think that guys like Alexei Kostic, we're also going to see, I think, guys like Dawson Baker see an uptick in minutes, maybe even Dominic Diomande. That was one guy that Kevin Young pointed out when we asked him about it. He said the losing Nate Pickens opens the door for BYU to get other looks at guys and for them to earn time in a rotation spot that was kind of earmarked for a guy like Nate Pickens. So hopefully that answers that question, but we'll see what happens with Ahmed. He's supposed to make a decision, I think, early this coming week about where he's going to ultimately commit and sign with. So it sounds like it's Houston or BYU, and we'll see if the blue or the red Cougars come out on top in that regard. All right, a couple other notes before we go on today's show, or tonight's show, or this morning, whatever time it is that we need to give major props to BYU women's soccer. Jennifer Rockwood is a living legend, and any of you who pay attention to what BYU women's soccer has done during her legendary run, because she's the only head coach that BYU women's soccer has had as an intercollegiate program. They went out as the number 8 seed in the Big 12 tournament and won the whole darn thing, to use a Coach Prime phrase. They were the number 8 seed going into that tournament, and yes, it was a tournament filled with upsets. In fact, BYU beat Kansas in the championship 1-0 thanks to Ellie Walbrook's goal in the first half, and Kansas had also made a similar type run from the 7th spot to win that. But the bigger point is that Jennifer Rockwood's squad won their first Big 12 title. So got to give a tip of the cap to Jennifer Rockwood, continually showing that she's never out of it. She had that College Cup run just a couple of years back. This season had a really kind of youth-laden squad, some injuries they absorbed as well during the season. And what did they do in the tournament? They just go out and win it. So that was a positive for women's soccer to do what they've done. And also probably should give a shout out going back a little bit further to Diljit Taylor and the BYU women's cross country team. Jane Hendegren, who's just an absolute sensation. We're talking about could be an all-timer, like all-time type athlete, just beginning her collegiate career. She won the Big 12 women's cross country race and did it in record time. So if you're not paying attention to what's happening in kind of the whole entirety of BYU's athletic department, in particular on the women's sports side of things, you're missing out, because Jennifer Rock was absolutely incredible with what she does in women's soccer. And I also do think that women's cross country, they're probably going to make a run at a national title again this season. So if you're a BYU fan in general, some good times happening for BYU across the board. And as Thomas says before we go on today's show, BYU basketball looks so good. Football will bounce back, and that's the hope. Tough loss for BYU football. We did a postcast on that earlier on Saturday, but I do think that football will have that chance. Now, TCU, who they will play, is obviously going to be relegated to spoiler role because they lost to Iowa State on Saturday. So that pretty much knocks them out unless something completely unforeseen happens with multiple losses to Big 12 contenders. TCU's now out of the Big 12 title hunt, and they're obviously going to be relegated to spoiler role. Are they going to be deflated, the wind's out of their sails when they come into Provo next Saturday, or will they come in motivated to maybe spoil BYU season? TBD, but I admire what you're having to say there, Thomas. I do think it's a positive for BYU. So that's going to do it for this postcast. Figured it was a super late night, obviously, because I've been dealing with these technical issues for, let's just put it this way, like almost 2 hours trying to get it on air, but we got it in. So hopefully all y'all are doing great out there late on this Saturday night, early Sunday morning. And once again, we'll have plenty of coverage for you guys in the week to come on BYU football, plenty of basketball coverage as well with BYU taking on Delaware and UConn. And as always, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. And until next time, thank you for being an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.